there was really no excuse for me to mess things up. But as I got into my early teenage years, I nonetheless decided that I would. And one of the big obstacles that I encountered was getting addicted to video games. It's not an exaggeration to say I probably spent 6 to 7 hours a day playing video games. I hit my heaviest weight just because I never got up and hardly even walked. I decided I just wanted to make a big change and actually get on the right path. And I decided to embrace the most primal methodology that I could think of to do so, and I went out and joined the local football team.
Welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And we have another in our Extraordinary and Ordinary series where we talk to people who probably ought to be extraordinary, but are just living mostly ordinary lives, yet are doing it in a bit of an extraordinary way. And that is certainly the case for Trent Emmack. Again, this is one of those fun ones where we get to talk about a friend and a colleague. Trent is definitely both of those things. And we commented after it was over that it's been a long time since I've grinned and laughed quite so much in an interview. We should probably do that more often. And so Trent's fun to talk to. He's very humble and self-effacing, that belies the talent and ability that he has. And so this is a fun conversation.
And for once on this podcast, it is very often that I, as a Missourian, am outnumbered by Virginians on this podcast. In this episode, it is reversed, where at least for the next little bit, I'm going to enjoy this while I have it. I had a fellow Missourian on the podcast, and that made me happy.
That is true. And this was the once and perhaps only time, which will be revealed as you listen to this conversation. So enjoy the conversation. Well, it's a lot of fun to be able to introduce Trent Emmack to all of you. Trent is an Unbound graduate and alum. He is currently one of our Unbound colleagues, which means we have the privilege of getting to work with Trent. I would call him a friend and hope that he would do the same back at me. And I've been able to watch Trent come through the ranks, so to speak, as being a student with Unbound and then serving on 2 Unbound cabinets. And so that's a lot of unpaid work that Trent put in. And so now I think he came to work for us just so he can earn a little bit of it. And then have watched his professional development with us at Unbound, which has been fantastic. But in addition to that, Trent is an athlete. He is somebody who has a lot of skills in a lot of different areas. And he has a really interesting story that I'm hoping we can get him to share with us here. And so we're really delighted to welcome Trent to the Be Unbound podcast. Welcome, Trent.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I may interject on there is that the athletics thing might be a little bit of an overstatement considering my primary experience in athletics so far is getting myself hurt. So at least that could factor.
Well, if I brought it out and said athletic and fitness, that works, right?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Fitness is ebbs and flows. It's a matter of whether I can walk a given day or not.
I would say that Trent qualifies as pretty significantly fit, just by sheer observation status. So we'll talk about that in a second here, but. Trent, we'll give you a chance to defend yourself first before David and I start taking whacks at you and say, how did you manage to get yourself in this position?
Yeah, totally.
How did you get yourself stuck here, Trent?
Yeah, how in the world did he get here, man? Yeah. No. So, yeah, my story really kind of starts back really in early teenage years. So I grew up in southwestern Missouri, and I was homeschooled all the way from the beginning. And I like to tell people that I pretty much had the picturesque homeschool childhood. The only difference is I didn't have an army of siblings with a 12-passenger van. I had one brother in a diesel truck that ran on veggie oil. So it was, roughly.
Which honestly pretty much just straight out equals out, right? I mean, like,
yeah, it's
if you're not doing 18 siblings, you're doing the veggie oil. I think you're still legit, Trent. Way to go.
Yeah,
so.
Totally. So we grew up out here, and I got set up for success really well in my adolescence. All the education that I received, the attention from my parents, all the guidance I got, there was really no excuse for me to mess things up. But as I got into my early teenage years, I nonetheless decided that I would. And one of the big obstacles that I encountered was getting addicted to video games. So when I was, I was either 12 or 13, I had a friend who gifted me his old Xbox 360 when he got a new Xbox One. And that triggered a whole set of situations where by the time I was, in 8th grade or so, it's not an exaggeration to say I probably spent 6 or 7 hours a day playing video games. It was basically all I did. I didn't really have a social life. I went from being a pretty good student to being a terrible one. I got into a routine of cheating just to get passed on tests and whatever I possibly could, whether that was, finding the study guide and taking that and taking notes off of it just so I could have all the answers or whatever the case would be. And that was a kind of a morass that I got stuck in for, 3 or 4 years. And it was kind of the low point in my life. And at that time, I also got to be borderline obese. I hit my heaviest weight just because I never got up and hardly even walked. So it was just a really bad position to be in. And I hung out there until about 2016 when a couple of factors happened. So the first one was my older brother. So my older brother, Donnie, is an Unbound alumnus as well. He was involved in one of the older, like original old timers. And he was going through the program, dual credit, while we were both still in high school. And I remember very distinctly, we were both at a coffee shop where he was working at the time. I was ostensibly supposed to be studying. I was goofing off, I'm sure. And he was having a conversation with a lady who was at the counter. He was a barista. And he was telling her about all the stuff that he was doing. And she was super congratulatory about all of the stuff that he was accomplishing and how close he was to actually graduating with his degree, despite the fact he was only 18 or 19 at the time. And that really hit home with me and made me start feeling a bit guilty about how unsuccessful I had been. So, nothing a little bit like shame to get you motivated. And
Especially if you got a brother involved. Yeah, I mean, like,
yeah.
there's a little competition happening there. So, because you
Yeah.
and Donnie are not competitive at all, right?
Oh,
That's
no.
that's what I've observed, right, David? So, yeah.
Yeah, not at all. But yeah, and at the same time, the other thing too was I did a co-op all the way through my school. And I had a group of students who I had been working with since I was, 8 years old or so. And as I was getting into like that midpoint in high school, I was watching a lot of these other people achieve in the same ways that Donnie was. And that was then putting even more light on me. It's like, okay, Donnie's maybe a little bit earlier. I've got 2.5 years to figure this out. These people are my age. Like, I have no excuse on why I'm not accomplishing what they were. So as I started to mull over these things, and as also, my parents started to intervene and try to help me out a little bit, Donnie started dragging me to the gym a little bit. Things started to improve, but I finally got to the point where I decided I just wanted to make a big change and actually get on the right path. And I decided to embrace the most primal methodology that I could think of to do so, and I went out and joined the local football team. So in the summer, I went out there and started doing some speed and agility training with the team, just so I wasn't a complete waste by the time I got there. The goal was to be one of the dancing bears on the offensive line, so I didn't need to be that athletic. I just needed to be able to kind of get out there and move to some degree.
So Trent,
But
what? So you go from some playing video games, all stuff, and then which you did go at primal and join the football team, which I think that's really a great description. So what was it like to show up for the first time for because you're talking about you joined like the optional summer practices, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
describe that a little bit because I suspect that might have been a little interesting.
It was one of the most awful things I've ever done. So I distinctly remember the first time I went to speed and agility. So the little twist is actually I had done it once before years ago when Donnie was thinking about doing football and ended up doing it. And I just went with him to one of the summer trainings to see what it was like. And so I knew what I was walking into, but it was horrible. They do circuit training. So you walk into this gym, the whole team's there, and they have, I think it was 5 posts set up all around the gym where there are different athletic activities that you're going to do. You join a group and you go to one group section, you're there for like 2 minutes, and then you're off to the next one. You do like 5 laps. And so you're running around and you're either doing burpees, you're doing high knees, you're doing step ups, you're doing ladders. And then after you're already completely worn out after like 45 minutes of this, they then make you run suicides up and down the gym. And I just remember getting to the end of that and thinking, okay, I hope this was the worst practice of the year. And then I get back, like I'm getting ready to go, and the coach is, hey, we'll see you tomorrow night. And like, wait, what? I don't think so. But no, they did. And I kept with it partially because I found that I was not the only person who was that far behind, and that was partially encouraging. There were a few other guys who were in similar situations to me from an athleticism perspective. So if they were going to keep at it, I had to too. I wasn't going to be the first one to quit. But
So,
yeah, it
so
was
did you become a
steep
dancing bear?
uphill. I got pretty close. So I did get on the offensive line, but because I was a little bit behind the curve and didn't start playing football until I was 16, I only got 1 year where I was going to be a starter, but I got to have a lot of fun in practice nonetheless. So,
Well,
yeah,
and the reason you weren't a starter was because of an injury, right?
yes. So in the last year, that was what happened. So at 3 games into my senior year, uh, got hurt, but we'll cover that. But in any case, what ended up happening, so as I was working through football and starting to get a little bit more resilient, as I was starting to overcome all of these difficulties, I was starting to actually exercise and find that as I was improving, I could see the success and it was making me feel more accomplished about myself. And that bled into all sorts of different directions because not only was I overcoming physical challenges, doing so was giving me the mental fortitude I needed to overcome the other more traditional challenges I was facing. So I was getting back into the swing of things in academics. I was actually having a pretty good year in high school. I was starting to think a little bit more about doing dual credit stuff so I could catch up with Donnie. Of course, that was still the primary motivator here. So everything was just starting to move in a good direction. And then we got to the year 2017. Now, what happened in 2016, 2017? Any guesses? Well, we had a presidential election. So
Well,
that was the fun thing.
oh, you
So,
mean that?
yeah, just
Just
thing
that
right
small
there.
detail.
Hey,
Okay.
David and I are thinking about important things, Trent.
Yeah. No. So I remember that was 2016 was the first presidential election that I really remember had any involvement in. I wasn't old enough to vote, of course, but 2012 I didn't remember much, didn't care about politics. 2016 I could actually track. And I remember in 2017 all of the fallout that we got from that 2016 election, where we had, of course, Trump get into office, and then everybody who didn't think that was a possibility was just absolutely paralyzed. And I was particularly captivated by all of the outcry on college campuses. The reason it fascinated me so much is that I was in a point where, of course, I was kind of coming out of a furrow of fragility and I was becoming more resilient. I was getting into a better spot. And at the same time, I was watching the rest of my generation have this cataclysm of fragility where all of a sudden it seemed like they were coming apart at the seams. And that really got me curious as to why this was happening. So I started thinking a bit more about those ideas, and that became a bit of a focal point of research for me. And I read a couple books, got into a few different things. And as I was thinking about all of those ideas, I started to look more into alternative options for education, even to a greater degree than I had before. Unbound being something that Donnie was doing, I had always had it on my radar, but wasn't sure it was going to be the right option for me. And that whole outcry really kind of pushed me in that direction to a final degree. It even made me skeptical of getting a degree in the first place. So you fast forward a couple years, I get to being a senior in football. And like you mentioned, Jonathan, I had a pretty significant injury in my last year. I was finally set to be a starter, and I tore my ACL and meniscus in my third game of the season. So that unfortunately cut everything short. And I found myself in another really rough spot. So I had finally gotten to the point where I was at kind of the peak. I felt better about myself. I had this identity, and that identity being football. I could go places, and if people ask me, so, what's your primary personality trait? I play football. That's when you're in high school, that's cool. And that all of a sudden, just like as a shock, was completely ripped away from me right when it seemed like things were getting good. And I fell back into a lot of those old habits that I had prior to football, where I was starting to spend too much time playing video games, studies started to slip again, lost a lot of my direction and drive. Until in 2018, I got to attend my first Apex that Unbound puts on every year. So Donnie brought me to Apex, and I initially was a bit skeptical. I thought it would be fun.
I just like this theme here. Like Donnie brought me to the gym. Donnie brought me to Apex. David and I know Donnie, so I just want you to know I've got some mental images of what that actually looked like.
Yeah. Brought is probably not the best operative word. It dragged, I think, is the better one.
It just sounded so peaceful, and I just didn't really have that picture in my head. But anyhow, okay, so Donnie brought you to Apex.
Yeah, drag, shame, threatened. Those all are
all great words,
applicable
yes.
adjectives.
Did you have to ride in his car? You had to, right?
Yes, actually, yes.
So for the audience, okay.
There's actually a little bit of a bear story here. So we carpooled with 3 other people who were driving from Missouri up to Michigan this year. So
that was the last time Donnie ever carpooled, right?
Yes, there were 5 of us in a 90s Toyota Corolla. So 3 abreast in the back seat, 2 in the front, and this poor girl got stuck in between me and Donnie in the back seat for 12 hours straight.
Oh no.
It
Yeah, that's
was
pretty rough.
yeah.
So just for the audience to know, Donnie and Trent are a little bit car snobs, and he's more of a car snob than Trent. And so to ride in Donnie's car, first of all, it's always
Mhm.
going to be a cool car. It also looks like it came off the showroom, and if you sneeze in it, you better have a disinfecting rag to wipe up
Yes.
after yourself. And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I've witnessed Trent riding in Donnie's car and then getting lectured as he got out because he didn't clean up every
Mhm.
single piece of dirt he brought in with him. So yeah.
Yeah. I still have not heard the end of the fact that he thinks there are crumbs stuck in his seat lining from me eating like a hamburger or something in there on the road.
I was there when
Yeah.
you exited after having that hamburger and witnessed the lecture. So yeah, all right. So Donnie brought you to Apex.
Yep.
Fantastic. All right, continue.
So at Apex, I came in and I was, really surprised by how much fun I had and all the connections I got to make there at Unbound. And that really ended up becoming somewhat of a turning point. I just realized I got my dates actually wrong. So this was a 2019 Apex, is the little difference here. So at 2019 Apex, I was at the point now where I was going to start picking up college classes. Football was over. I was recovering from my knee surgery. And I was starting to look for other opportunities that I can get involved in and other ways I could really test myself. And 2019 was a really fun year to be at Apex because the cabinet had a bigger role, I think, than many other cabinets I've had at Apex. They were very active in the way they interacted with the students. The games and activities really centered around the cabinet's personalities, so they were just on stage a lot. And I started thinking how cool it'd be to be able to be one of those team members. So I decided to go out and take a flyer, fill in a cabinet application, and see if I could get on the team for next year. And I honestly had no expectation of actually getting accepted. I figured, I'm kind of a community outsider at this point. I'm, 18, 19 years old. I have no real skills to think of. So I actually got accepted. I was a little bit shocked. Donnie ended up applying at the same time, and so we both got on the team. So that made me feel a little bit more secure in my position that, hey, at least he's going to keep me from
So
totally screwing this up.
so I have a story that you might not know about this, Trent. So I am for several years now. I've not picked the cabinets. I'm generally more of an advisory role, and so I wasn't fully involved in this. But we ended up calling Donnie first. We had actually made a decision to bring both of you on the cabinet,
Mm.
and so we called Donnie first. And Donnie said, "Great." He says, "I got to ask a sensitive question." And we said, "What is that?" Witnessing this call, I was making it, but I'm on the call. And he said, "If Trent's not on, I'm not doing it." And I said, "Okay." And he said, he says, "I'm not sure how many slots there are, but there's not a scenario where I'm saying yes to cabinet if I end up taking Trent's spot." And so, no hard feelings, guys. But if Trent's on, I'm great. And if not, you guys can find other kind of people. So anyhow, I always thought that was really
Yeah.
cool. I thought that was a neat gesture from Donnie.
Mhm.
Happily, we had already decided that he just happened to be the first call. We were already had got our slate, and you were on it. But I always thought that was really cool. So
Yeah. No, it's a good picture of my big brother, right? So it explains a lot of the dragging. So yeah. So we end up getting on the cabinet, of course, and it was a phenomenal experience in a variety of ways. So the number of lessons that I learned between 2019 and 2021 cabinets, really it was 2020 and 2021 cabinets, was phenomenal. And one of the first things that we learned how to overcome was challenge, because of course, 2019 being the 2020, the Apex, there was a little bit of an event that derailed things there.
I do remember what
So
happened that year, David. You know what
Mhm.
happened that year?
That
So
one definitely rings a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe even more important than the first one. So, but so we were on that cabinet, and when COVID did hit, I remember it was this really kind of cataclysmic point where we had gotten to the point where our Apex was nearly finished. Like we had some
Yeah.
polishing details there, we had speakers hired, we had games planned, the schedule was almost entirely set. And I remember the day actually when we had the call with you guys on staff about having to cancel Apex, and then immediately switching into pivot mode and planning the Spark events that we ended up executing, which were the 4 regional equivalents that we were able to pull off. And so
Yeah, and
that was
just for the audience to know, the we're talking about a group of people that are working 30 hours a week from September on. Then we're coming into late spring, early summer, and then a lot of the work is done, and you're getting ready to and the cabinet's hopes and dreams are in this. This is a big event for them. They get some recognition, well deserved, because they've worked like crazy to do this. They had built on Trent talked about previous Apex had been a watershed for the way Apexes had developed, and so they'd really built on that. Some really big new ideas that had never been before, and people were really involved in it. And it was devastating to lose that. But I just want to put in a plug that Trent wouldn't do. We consulted with our medical staff, and they said that we couldn't do a full week-long event like Apex typically is, but we could probably get away with doing an event that was everybody stayed in different locations, and then we'd do like a Friday night, Saturday, and then it would end Sunday. But nobody could stay. Normally, Apex, everybody's housed in the same places, but you have to get housing and all that stuff and ways to do. And so it was a matter of taking an event that was a 1 week long event, shifting it into 4 regional Spark events that were less than a weekend, that had to look totally different and had to conform to a whole bunch of different COVID policies while being balanced with what we thought was wise and smart with our own medical personnel's COVID advice. And obviously all unprecedented. We've never done anything like it before. Not to mention that the ownership of Unbound shifted on July 1st, 2020 of that year. So we were also simultaneously, while the cabinet was doing all this, launching a brand new company, the same company, but launching it under our new leadership. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that Trent says we had to shift to Spark events. Yeah, we're talking about a massive revolution, a death of a dream, and then kind of an immediate having to reset and do something totally different, which had all these unknowns. We weren't even sure if we'd be able to travel certain states, and it was really wild. So
Yeah, it was a really good experience too at the same time. Of course, it was really hard as all of this like ground shift was happening, but what ended up coming out of it in that fall was one of the more fun experiences I've ever had, particularly because the way we ended up traveling to each event was by driving. And so me and Donnie got to go to 3 events, and that equivocated to 3 different, long road trips.
we had a
Where,
lot of
so,
that was the year of the road trip, man.
oh yeah,
The Unbound staff left Virginia, drove down to Texas, up through Colorado and back over the course
hmm
of like I forget how many weeks, and it was something else because again and this was in the middle of an election, so I remember
yeah,
that election because it was a little wild. Nobody was quite sure what was going to happen. So yeah,
yeah, just another one of those minor events.
minor ones. Yep.
So, yeah, no, I think Donnie and I put like 10,000 miles on his Mazda or something like that in like 3 months. It was a lot. It was nuts, but
Ten
it was
thousand
fun.
miles and 0 hamburger crumbs.
Yeah, no, lesson was learned at that point. Just get whatever food is likely to make the least amount of mess. So, salads preferred. But yeah, so through that whole experience, I learned a lot of lessons about overcoming challenge outside of, going back to that whole football thing of developing resilience. This was the first time in life where I was tested in a measure that was beyond a more physical aspect. And so getting to apply some of those same mindsets to overcome some of the challenges there, working with a team for really the first time was also a really awesome experience, and having to go through the same stuff with all the team members, learning the same lesson along the way. That was a blast, but as you said, there is a measure of recognition with the cabinet, and I have no shame in saying that when that whole thing ended, I still kind of wanted to have some fun with this thing. I wanted to actually be able to do a full Apex. And so me and 2 others, Caitlin and Hannah Jax now, we all joined the next cabinet. So 2021 then ended up being another really awesome experience where things were a little bit different because we had a more condensed timetable for actually planning the 2021 Apex, because normally the cabinets were starting in like, October, November. We had to start in January because of how long the Spark events ran. But we also had this element of prerequisite experience. So when we got together, we of course had our growing pains. We had a lot of stuff we had to sort out, but everything just interlocked really quickly after that. And once we hit our stride, we were like sprinting. And so things started to come together really quickly, and we had all sorts of goofy ideas, and just also on a character level and a fun level from personalities. I mean, we just blended like no other team I've really ever seen before. And we got to the point where we're still working together today in various capacities. And we were the first cabinet to ever successfully plan our own retreat after the original one, where we were able to get back together, hang out in Virginia, hang out on the beach, and just have built some of those really good connections that truthfully I didn't have very much to that point in my life. So I had always had friends growing up, especially through co-op, but they were kind of the friends you saw once a week. And, you only talked to them really in between classes or whatever. And then on the first cabinet, we certainly had some of that. We were good friends, but it just didn't click the same way. And so the community experience I got out of the 2021 cabinet was something that I've been really chasing to grow ever since then. So we worked through that. We ended up doing Apex Forge, and
Just to tell the audience about, to back up what Trent's saying, all but one. So of the 2020 cabinet works for Unbound now. And Gabby, if you're listening, apply. And so, and then also the 2021 cabinet is still the core and the vast majority of our teen track program that we run at conferences around the country. So yeah, so that team really did bond in some unusual ways and continues to serve together in a bunch of different capacities, distributed through the rest of the Unbound team, but also still operating a little bit like a cabinet several years hence as you put on the teen track programs all around the country. So just to back up what Trent was saying, that was not boast, that actually is the case. So yeah.
Yeah, we've kind of also become propagating it. We've got little Rebecca now, so we're getting the team growing. So
So the background there is that Hannah and Caleb got married and recently, yes, have a little baby Rebecca. And so, yeah, that's true.
growing team. But yeah, so that was a point then where for the first time since football, I ended up feeling like I had a direction. So at this point, of course, cabinet had taken over my life for 2 years, and it was a phenomenal commitment, one of the best things that I've done. And so when everything ended up concluding at the end of Apex and we went home, I remember for the next month, that might have been the most bored I have ever been in my entire life because I was working part-time at a restaurant, of course, and I was there and I was filling up my hours. I was no longer in school. So once all the cabinet stuff ran out, I'm like, I have nothing to do in my day anymore. I just had 10 meetings wiped off of my calendar for every week. So as soon as a
Most people celebrate. Trent just got bored.
Yeah. Well, celebration lasted for about a day and then, then realization hit. But yeah, and then I saw a sales position open up at Unbound. I was like, okay, perfect. Finally, I can get back in and basically do more of the same thing I was. So I applied for that, was apparently in good graces enough and hadn't screwed everything up sufficiently enough for you guys to tell me no. So I was brought on and now I get to work on the sales team here with Unbound. And it's been one of the most fun and best jobs I've been able to be involved in.
Well, honestly, we figured at this point Donnie would beat you into shape, and so we'd probably get a pretty good product, and so it was an easy, low risk hire. So
it's a reasonable enough assumption. I mean, given what was it at that point, what had been 22 years of Donnie working on me. I mean, you'd think it would probably work out.
Have an impact. So, well, if you can't tell, we're pretty fond of Trent. We're fond of picking on him. We're fond of getting picked on by him, which it goes both ways, and we're fond of some significant effort that he's put in over the years. Trent, that was a great story. You left out a few pieces, not purposely here, but that I've observed. And one of those is that we talked about you being an athlete, and I think you definitely qualified as an athlete. I played against you in Ultimate. I think that probably makes, can say that you qualify there. You're certainly seriously into fitness, but there's another kind of fitness you're into, which is you're one of the most intellectual and cerebral people on our team. And you've really, in the last several years, really leaned into the world of ideas. You're probably one of the widest read folks on our team. And because of that, Trent is a frequent and popular speaker for our events, for the conventions and events that we again invite to attend through Teen Track, but also as an independent. And you speak on some pretty significant topics. So tell us a little bit about that, because you did mention that you had been a good student, then were a poor student, and then got back to being a serious student again. And you mentioned that the election involvement had you kind of interested in some things and reading some books, but you really dove into that pretty heavily. So talk a little bit about that side, because I know you almost as much. I don't mean this it's kind of a funny term, but almost as an intellectual as much as anything else, because you're really into ideas, and we have a lot of really interesting discussions about stuff that you're reading and some ways you synthesize that and bring that to the things that you do from. So.
Yeah, well, the thing with that is, so you say I'm one of the most well-read people here. I would throw the challenge flag on that, knowing so the rest of our team. But no, it is the case that I do like.
We're just for the purpose of conversation. Olivia doesn't count. Okay, so
yeah.
Olivia. So we already know you're a boy. The rest of us put together. So, Ashley's internship is over, so I think you're free and clear. Okay. You're back at the top 5, Trent. So yeah,
sounds good. But yeah, no, it's being able to talk about ideas has been something that has really flourished in the last couple of years because of opportunities Unbound has given to me. So I had done public speaking a decent amount growing up through classical conversations where I did my co-op, but I hadn't really done anything for a few years. And then in 2021, when we were on the cabinet, I got asked to do a devotion. And doing that devotion ended up being something I had a lot of fun with. And apparently you guys liked it because then he asked me to do more devotions. And so that was a kind of a starting point to something that
Trent
has
is a
become a bit
good
of a passion.
speaker. Trent is a very good speaker. Trent is an excellent speaker. He's also an excellent preacher, and they're not the same thing. And so, yes, in fact, I distinctly remember standing in the back of the room at Colorado going, "Did you know Trent can preach?" to the person standing beside me. I was like, "I didn't know Trent could preach like this." And so, yeah, Trent is an excellent speaker, but he's actually a very good preacher.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I didn't know either. So we were all finding it out at the same time. But yeah, no, it's definitely become something that has been a bit of a passion for me now because the truth of the matter is that when I'm just left to my own devices, I don't have something that I'm actively preparing for. I don't tend to have like this super deliberate internal dialogue. I think about things, but I think about things better when I know I'm going to be writing out and explaining it to somebody or doing a session. And so it's been a lot of fun for me because it's been encouraging me to step into doing some more reading, researching ideas, writing stuff down, being more deliberate about it. And then also, of course, revising sessions as I get to do some repeatedly, especially with the team tracks, getting to give a session and then get feedback on it and sometimes have people disagree with it is a lot of fun. I really like sorting out ideas. So having people point out the things I'm perhaps incorrect about and then having to go back and actually think about it, see if that is legitimate criticism or not. It's one of the better mental activities that you really can engage in. And it's something that the sessions that Unbound has provided me the opportunity to do has enabled to a significant degree.
Well, it's been a fun journey to watch that development. And we just recently were together at an event and speaking, and Trent was actually the inaugural speaker. He kicked us off. And it was a fantastic session. I really enjoyed it. I was taking some notes and learning from it. What was really fun was that Trent had a session, I had like 4 or 5 sessions. And every one of my sessions, the students in the room were referencing Trent's material. And so, yeah, he had the inauguration, but he also kicked it off, but he did it in a way that stuck. And so because of that, we had, I think, a much deeper and richer conversation than we would have otherwise, which as a speaker, that's what you want, right? And so it was a fun thing to watch, and it was a fun thing to experience. And it was one of those things that enriched the entire experience for everybody. And so we were able to get deeper and go farther with that students, which, if any of them were listening, was one of the most amazing group of students we've had. We really had a lot of fun with the Midwinter folks in Pennsylvania. We had a really, really great group of students there, and we had some really good conversations and often referred to stuff that Trent had learned, talked about, and synthesized. So Trent is really good at taking the things he is reading, thinking about them, but then presenting them in a way that makes everybody else think as well. So,
Yeah.
well, Trent, thanks very much for telling the story, for all that you contribute to Unbound, and for also being, I mean, you were pretty transparent there. And so Trent had an awful lot of modesty too. He kind of has a shrug your shoulders, all shucks part of things that belies and covers over the fact that he's very much a high performance person, both in his physical training as well as his professional work and the things that he does, as well as being a lot of fun to hang with. So Trent, thanks so much for coming. And it's fun to hang out with you. And in the fairly near future, we're going to be able to do it on a much more regular basis as Trent is migrating from his current location in Missouri to a location very close to me here in Virginia. So in this case, I win and David loses. He's not next door to David, but he's a lot closer than he's going to be. So sorry, David.
I'll get over it. I
Yeah.
still have Donnie for a little bit at least.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing against you, David. It's just there's more out there. So sorry. It was one versus the
Yeah,
many.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Trent. And if you call in and if you talk to us, there's a good chance that you'll get Trent on the phone. So definitely do that. And also, if you're interested in having Trent speak at your event, contact us. I can tell you it's a good deal. Well, what do we say? It was a fun conversation. It's always fun to talk to Trent. We've had some great memories with Trent. Lots of road trips, as we referenced in there. Lots of experiences at lots of live events. We now get to travel as a team with Trent to various events as a speaker, and it never fails to entertain. And we have a great time in the process of becoming smarter. Trent, even, this happens a lot of time, but we stopped recording, and then Trent had, 8 points about history and some other things about some stuff he had listened to recently or read recently that were really fascinating. And so he's a fun person. You can't talk to or hang around Trent for long without picking up a lot of new ideas, a lot of new thoughts. So.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think something that I took away from this conversation with Trent that I think is a theme that I have seen through a lot of our extraordinary and ordinary conversations that we've had recently is that he was, first of all, very honest about where he had come from and just the fact that he has not always necessarily been in a high performing mindset where he has been capable of doing and thinking through a lot of really high level things. And so, for one thing, I really appreciated the fact that he is willing to be honest and even a little bit self-deprecating about that. But also just wanted to note the fact that his journey in starting down the path to getting to where he is at today from where he was, which is vastly different, was something that was seemingly very small and very, he called it extreme, but it seems like a fairly ordinary thing to do, which was just to join a football team or to just like make one commitment to a change in his lifestyle that ended up leading to a lot of other changes in his life. And so I think it's just worth noting that we often underestimate the impact that a very small change, but to something that is consistent and something that we can stay committed to can make in our lives. And I think that's something that Trent can attest to. And I think that a lot of our past guests can as well.
Yeah, there's sometimes this thought that change is this long and inexorable process that takes forever. And often that's not the case. I mean, things change in a twinkling and it turns on something as simple as a decision. And so I've heard Trent tell this story a lot. And so, he's in a bad situation. He's unmotivated, he's unhealthy, he's morally compromised because of the cheating he's doing in his schoolwork. He's really got no future. And, he's resisting and not happy about his parents and Donnie, trying to bump him into something else and to step up. And then in an instant, in a moment, he decides, that's it. I don't like this anymore. And to your point, David, he makes one simple decision that comes with a lot of work, and then he puts in a lot of work. And then I think that's the first remarkable part of the story. The second is that he goes all in for football, and then he manages to be wise enough when he realizes that football isn't a thing. He transfers everything he learned from football to the next thing. So many times that's what we wish student athletes did, and they don't. They get their entire identity in that sport. And you heard Trent resists even being called an athlete. He fully identified. When I first met Trent, he identified himself as a football player. That was where he kind of rested a lot of his identity. But it didn't take him long to realize that was temporary and that he couldn't stay there. And so then he was able to switch and to say, no, everything I learned about hard work and toughness and becoming anti-fragile, which is a term Trent uses a lot, building resilience, I learned that in football, and it transfers to these other things. And I've seen Trent do that more rapidly as he's gotten older, meaning that, he takes everything he just learned and then he transfers to the next thing and then moves up in that and transfers it to the next thing, which honestly is one of the reasons it makes him so much fun to hang out with and such an asset to, somebody like us, like working for Unbound. We just watch him grow by leaps and bounds all the time. And that's a cool thing, but it started in this one little, I'm doing something different. And then to double down and stick with it and to stick with it and keep doing it. Yeah, I think that's really cool and really inspiring. Makes me looking at places where I'm lazy at the moment and thinking I should jump myself out of that. So yeah.
Oh, seriously. Pretty much every time we have one of these extraordinary and ordinary conversations, I leave it going like, man, I feel like I'm slacking. I feel like I need to go and do a lot of things, even though over the process of having the conversation, we realize like, no, it's not about just going and immediately changing everything about your life. It's just going and doing one thing different. But when we hear about the results of that, then we're really excited. So.
Yeah, audience, pity me. I'm always the ones listening to that going, what have I done with my life? That's especially when I'm interviewing these last couple of times, everybody's been 20 plus years younger than me. And I'm like, man, what am I doing with my life? So, well, thanks again for listening. And, we're not going to do a big pitch at the end of this one. I'm just going to point out that, yeah, you heard that Trent talked about change, but then you heard how some of that change manifests itself. We don't run a football team, but we do run at Unbound, the other programs that Trent referenced quite a bit. And it's not that we promise that you'll get results exactly like Trent, but I can promise you an atmosphere that makes the kinds of things that happen to Trent normal. And so that kind of transformation, that kind of advancement, that kind of training, that kind of transferable skills that are then used, and we watch people level up and level up and level up and then do amazing things. David and I get the privilege, and Trent get the privilege of seeing that happen every day. And so, indeed, if you are interested in those programs, call in. You're likely to talk to Trent, and he'll explain it to you. And also, in all seriousness, if you have a conference and you're looking for a track, we call it teen tracks, which is a little ironic because we don't actually believe in teenagers around here. It should be, I keep arguing that we should have a teen track with teen crossed out and call it the YA, the young adult track. But if you're looking for a track for young people, we have an absolutely phenomenal team that includes Trent, who creates a really fantastic content and delivers that in a way that gets absolutely rave reviews. So if you're a conference or a convention organizer, contact us for that. Or if you just want a young person who can speak really well and communicate really well and do it in a way that will make your audience think no matter what their age, you definitely should get in touch with us and think about hiring Trent to be on stage at your event. I can tell you that he is one of the most poised and precise speakers that I know. And I work with a lot of speakers and I do a lot of speaking, and Trent's very good at it. And so if you're interested in that at all, definitely contact us. In the meantime, until we meet again and for our next podcast, thank you so much for joining us. And until then, be unbound.